A frost-laden morning descends upon the village, and it is not gentle. It creeps under doors, slips through thatched roofs, and gnaws at the skin like a relentless predator. The air itself seems brittle, each breath a small battle against the cold that sharpens the senses and dulls the body simultaneously. Smoke rises from a single hearth, a thin wisp twisting into the gray, unwelcoming sky. Its scent is heavy with charred bread and damp straw, a bitter perfume of survival, or perhaps of failure. Outside, the village is unervingly silent. The market square, once alive with haggling voices, clanging carts, and the braying of donkeys, lies abandoned. Frozen footprints, some half erased by frost, hint at hurried departures, as if the villagers themselves have been fleeing something unseen. A lone cart tilts to one side, its wheel locked in ice, like a fallen soldier immobilized by the battle he could not finish. From afar, the distant clatter of hooves echoes over frozen fields, hollow and ghost-like, a remnant of life that has moved on, leaving behind only memory and frost. Inside the cottages, shadows gather in corners, as if reluctant to witness the day. Children huddle together, curling themselves into tight shapes against the pervasive chill. Their skin is pale, almost translucent, showing the thinness of life stretched to its limits. Limbs that should be supple are brittle, faces hollowed by hunger, and eyes unnaturally bright, as though the soul, unable to manifest in body, shines from within. One boy kneels at the frost-covered window, pressing his hand to the icy glass. He traces the delicate crystal patterns, watching them spiral and fracture, and in them he sees the cruel mockery of the bread he cannot reach, the warmth he cannot feel. The frost becomes a mirror, each tiny spike reflecting his own brittle frame and hollow stomach. He imagines feasts, rivers of milk, loaves steaming from the oven, but the images dissolve instantly, leaving only the pang of longing and the ache of impossibility. The adults move through the village like shadows of themselves, each step deliberate, each motion a muted act of endurance. Faces are drawn and gaunt, eyes sunken yet alert, muscles tight from labor and hunger. Their whispers carry like knives through the thin walls. Famine, taxes, disease. Each syllable cuts the fragile hope that remains, leaving hearts quivering and bodies stooped under invisible burdens. A mother sits beside a broken hearth, coughing in her sleeve, the ragged sound echoing into the empty room. Her husband leans against the doorway, jaw tight, staring at the horizon as if willing it to bring food, warmth, and reprieve. Outside, the wind rattles shutters and scrapes along frozen ground, a voice of the indifferent world, reminding them that survival is never guaranteed, only claimed moment by moment. In the midst of this quiet despair, the village priest carries his fragile gift, the last vial of oil for the chapel candles. His movements are careful, precise, each step a prayer unto itself. He walks past the children, whose eyes cling to the faint glimmer of hope in his presence. He leaves whispered prayers in his wake, prayers that mingle with the rising smoke and the scent of charred bread. These prayers are not words of theology, but of sustenance, of endurance, of recognition that in this world, even the smallest flame of faith is as vital as the bread that is missing. The children reach out instinctively, tiny hands brushing empty air, longing for the warmth and comfort the priest cannot fully provide. Their stillness becomes a quiet declaration of resilience, of stubborn life clinging to the edge of the impossible. The children are emblematic of the village itself. They are saplings bent under the relentless weight of winter, their fragile frames quivering, yet alive. Their small, shivering bodies tell stories of persistence that words cannot contain. In their eyes, One sees the unspoken knowledge of their own insignificance against the immensity of hardship, yet also the quiet rebellion of life refusing to yield. They huddle together, sharing heat and solace in small, intimate gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a whispered comfort, a fleeting smile. Each motion is loaded with silent heroism, an affirmation that survival, however tenuous, is still possible. The wind threads itself through skeletal trees that line the outskirts of the village, carrying with it a mournful song. Branches scrape against each other, echoing across frozen fields, producing a symphony of despair and endurance. Empty carts groan in the cold, their wooden bones strained beneath frost and neglect. The village exhales collectively, as if the stones, straw, and wood themselves are aware of the relentless passage of time and the hardships endured. Frozen puddles glint under the dim light, reflecting the gray sky above, capturing the sorrow of the living in their icy stillness. The absence of laughter is palpable. The absence of firelight dancing across walls presses on the villagers' chests, making each breath a conscious effort. Even the animals have withdrawn, seeking warmth in shadows and corners that offer little comfort. A dog curls beneath a broken cart, its body tense, ears flicking at the faintest sound of movement. A cow shifts in its stall, the bell around its neck clanging softly against frozen wood. The very earth beneath the village seems to shiver in recognition of the suffering above it, cold and unyielding, yet quietly bearing witness. A boy at the window notices a crow land upon a frosted roof, its black feathers stark against the pale morning light. He tilts his head, eyes wide, and whispers into the cold air, imagining the bird as a messenger from a distant world where warmth, abundance, and safety exist. Bring me bread. Bring me warmth. Bring me a story to survive the night. The crow caws once, harshly, and lifts into the gray expanse, carrying away the faint hope of a boy too young to understand despair fully, yet old enough to feel it keenly. This simple encounter becomes a quiet mirror of the village's collective fate, small, fragile gestures seeking meaning in a world that offers little. Evening approaches slowly, folding the village into shadowed solitude. Smoke from the single hearth twists higher into the chill sky, catching the last light of the sun, a fleeting reminder of warmth before darkness takes hold. Candle flames in the priest's hands flicker, casting shadows that stretch across stone and straw, animating the stillness with ghostly life. The priest pauses to check on the children once more, murmuring blessings that feel as much like promises as they do confessions of helplessness. His eyes trace the angles of their hollowed faces, the taut lines of hunger and suffering etched into their flesh. He places a hand lightly upon a shoulder, feeling the pulse of life, fragile but persistent, and in that contact he carries both sorrow and hope, two sides of the same coin, inseparable in their delicate balance. The night deepens, and the wind rises, threading its way through the village, tugging at doors and rattling shutters with relentless persistence. Frost crystallizes on windows, forming impossible patterns, intricate and cruel, like a frozen echo of the lives they enclose. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl cries, a solitary witness to both despair and endurance. Its call cuts through the night, a sharp reminder that life continues, relentless and impartial, indifferent to human suffering. The village sleeps fitfully, each heartbeat a small rebellion against the encroaching cold, the shadow of famine, and the weight of loss. Dreams are fleeting, fragile, and often haunted, yet within them lies the faintest flicker of hope, a remembered laugh, a dream of warmth, a future not yet surrendered. Even in this pervasive chill, life endures. The small flame in the hearth continues to burn. The boy's imagination transforms frost into feasts, and the priest's prayers rise in thin, silver threads toward the indifferent sky. The village exists in a fragile limbo, suspended between despair and a possibility that life might continue. Each heartbeat, each breath, each flicker of light is a testament to resilience, a quiet defiance against the shadow of winter. The frost-laden morning will return, painting the village anew in shades of white and gray. Empty carts will creak under the weight of ice. Smoke will rise from the solitary hearth, and the children will watch, waiting and hoping, their eyes luminous with quiet endurance. Shadows will lengthen, whispers will persist, and life will continue in small, stubborn ways. Somewhere, in the hush of wind through skeletal trees, a story begins to unfurl, a story that will carry the village through the night, into the darkness, and toward a dawn yet unseen, fragile and uncertain, yet undeniably alive. And so the village lies, suspended between survival and surrender, each frostbitten breath a testament to life's stubborn persistence, each silent prayer a vow that the darkness, no matter how merciless, will not claim them entirely. Even in despair, there is story. Even in silence, there is witness. Even in the cold, there is life. A bitter wind sweeps across the cobblestones, carving through the narrow streets like a sharp blade, carrying the tang of unwashed bodies, smoke, and rotting refuse. The air is thick, sticky with the residue of despair, a scent that clings to the bones of the living and whispers of every suffering this city has known. Each stone underfoot is slick with grime and history, slick with rain that has fallen through the ages, soaking into the cracks where weeds grow stubbornly, indifferent to human misery. The city is half forgotten, half destroyed, a carcass of a world once proud and bustling, now a hollow echo of itself, scarred by hunger, pestilence, and neglect. In the alleyways, children crouch beneath rotting carts, their small bodies curled tightly against the cold, against hunger, against the shadow of those who would do them harm. Fingernails blackened with soil and disease scratch at splintered wood and cracked stone, digging, clawing, as if the act itself could summon safety. One girl, no older than 7, clutches a tattered doll. Its porcelain face is fractured, and in the dim light of the dusk, the cracks mirror her own fragility. Her wide eyes scan the shadows, alert to every whisper of movement, every distant footfall. She rocks back and forth, murmuring the lullabies her mother once sang, half-remembered, half-invented, as if the memory itself might keep the dark at bay. The city moves around them, indifferent. The distant toll of the church bell strikes with mechanical precision, announcing the passing hours to a world that no longer notices the small, suffering lives in its streets. Hour after hour, the bells echo, relentless and impartial. Yet amidst this relentless monotony, life clings stubbornly to the alleyways and gutters. A crust of bread scavenged from the corner of a market stall, a handful of apples dropped by an inattentive passerby. Each stolen morsel is a small triumph, a defiance of the cruelty pressing from all sides. And yet, there is the ever-present company of rats, scuttling along the gutters, their tiny, precise footsteps a cruel mimicry of the children's own stunted growth. Life survives here, but it is delicate, fragile, and mercilessly tested. Every door in this city is a threshold into another private story of survival and suffering. Behind every shuttered window waits a secret. A father murmuring prayers over empty pots. A mother tracing her hand along a wall where her children once played. A boy too young to comprehend the emptiness pressing on every corner of his existence. The world passes them by with footsteps, curses, and the barking of stray dogs, all filtered through a veil that the city itself draws over their lives. And yet, even in this pervasive despair, moments of tenderness emerge like fragile blooms in winter. A boy hands a crust of bread to his sister, his hand shaking not just with cold but with fear and hope. A girl hums to her younger brother, her voice frail yet unwavering, a small rebellion against the encroaching silence. The air is thick with soot, with despair, with the relentless reminder of hunger. It clings to lungs, dulls senses, and presses down with the weight of countless forgotten souls. Yet, in the cracks of this bleakness, life asserts itself quietly. A laugh escapes, ragged but genuine. A hand reaches out to steady another who stumbles. A shared piece of stale bread becomes an act of communion. Hope clatters softly in the fragile rhythms of survival. In whispered stories of faraway lands, in imaginary adventures that play between the carts and gutters, in the tender, stolen acts of care that mark the children as stubbornly, painfully human. The sun sinks low, leaving the streets bathed in a sickly, amber gloom. Shadows stretch across walls and cobblestones, merging with the forms of the children who slip into them, becoming indistinguishable from the dark. The city both consumes and shelters them, a duality that they will never fully understand. The wind whistles through cracks in stone, carrying scents of damp earth, rotting wood, and the faint smoke of distant fires, reminders that night is both a blanket and a predator. A boy huddles near a crate, knees drawn to his chest, shivering beneath a threadbare coat. His eyes are wide, reflecting the faint glow of a torch someone has left burning on a doorstep. He stares at it as though it were a sun, fragile and ephemeral, aware that warmth is a fleeting luxury. He listens. The creak of timbers, the scuttle of rats, the occasional cough of a sickly neighbor. Each sound is both warning and companion. His mind wanders to the whispers of the past, to imagined voices hovering just beyond the walls, offering comfort and cruelty in equal measure. Above, the sky darkens to an inky black, pierced by indifferent stars. The moon rises, pale and watchful, casting a silver light that glances off wet stones and broken toys, illuminating the remnants of lives lived too quickly, lost too soon. The moon sees all and judges none. And yet, in this world of shadows, life persists in quiet, stubborn ways. A hand squeezed in reassurance, a whispered promise of tomorrow, a song hummed to ward off despair. These small gestures form the fragile backbone of survival, and they endure where strength alone would fail. Through the labyrinth of alleyways, the children move like ghosts. Each has learned the language of silence, of movement without sound, of shadows as both refuge and mask. Their eyes scan every corner, every rooftop, every doorway, interpreting the world with a vigilance born of necessity. Some speak to one another only in glances, sharing entire conversations without words. A sister draws her brother close beneath a torn cloak. A boy tugs his friend into the shadow of a cart. Here, life exists in the microcosms of trust, in fleeting alliances and acts of care that the city's cruelty cannot extinguish. The wind grows colder, sharper, slicing through the city like a blade. It carries scents that speak of both decay and distant comfort. A hearth burning wood, the faint tang of bread, the smell of wet stone. The children sniff it, trying to locate its source, to draw what warmth and nourishment they can from the faint promise it offers. Each gust is a challenge, a reminder that life here is earned with every breath, every careful step, every quiet, desperate action. As darkness deepens, shadows lengthen and merge. The children vanish into them, bodies melding with the night, leaving behind only echoes of breath, the faint warmth of small hearts beating stubbornly against cold, and the remnants of stolen food and tattered toys. A doll lies discarded in the street, fractured face catching the light of a torch. In that porcelain crack, the spirit of the girl who held it seems to linger, as if refusing to leave the world entirely. Every alley, every stone, every rotting plank tells a story. The city murmurs and whispers and echoes of hunger, loyalty, betrayal, fleeting joy. Each abandoned home and shuttered window is a tomb and a cradle, holding memories of those who came before and those who cling desperately to life now. The city remembers, it does not forgive. And in that memory, life endures quietly, invisibly, in the small acts that define humanity. Sharing, comforting, imagining, hoping. Night presses deeper. The children's presence is mostly gone, but the pulse of life lingers. Each footstep they took leaves a faint trace in the stones and dust. Each whispered promise leaves an imprint on the cold walls. Somewhere, in the dark, a girl hums a lullaby. Somewhere, a boy cradles his sister. Somewhere, a hand reaches out, brushing against another. These acts, small and almost imperceptible, are defiance, resistance, and proof that even in the deepest shadow, life persists. Rain begins to fall in fine, cold drops, washing over the city and hissing against the cobblestones. It mingles with the soot, the refuse, the smoke, the cold, the warmth, carrying away some of the grime while leaving the memory of hunger and fear intact. The children press themselves against walls and crates, letting the rain mingle with the tears they no longer dare to shed. The night is relentless, but within it is a strange beauty, the glint of wet stones, the shimmer of droplets on hair and clothes, the quiet communion of bodies huddled together for warmth. Through this city of shadows, life continues, fragile, persistent, human. There is fear, and there is tenderness. There is hunger, and there is sharing. There is despair, and there is hope, so faint as to be almost invisible, yet impossible to extinguish entirely. And when the bell tolls again, echoing through the streets, it does so not only for the city's dead, but also for the living, for those who endure, who survive, who love, if only in whispers. And so the city exhales, settling into a ragged rhythm of darkness and faint light, silence and whisper, decay and life. Somewhere in the alleys, life persists, stubborn and delicate, awaiting the uncertain promise of dawn. Shadows merge, dissolve, and reform, carrying the traces of countless small hearts that beat against the cold, against hunger, against despair. In this liminal space between the ruin and the warmth, between fear and fleeting joy, the city breathes. And in its breath, the children survive, not triumphantly, not safely, but persistently, beautifully, painfully human. The streets, the alleys, the shadows, they remember, but they also bear witness to the stubborn pulse of life, the quiet defiance of hope, the indestructible resilience of those who refuse to vanish entirely. The bitter wind blows on, carrying with it scents of rot, rain, and faint promise. The city sleeps fitfully, but not alone. Somewhere, in its labyrinth of stone and shadow, life continues. Somewhere, a child's heart beats against the cold. Somewhere, hope clatters softly in the darkness, waiting for the dawn. Morning light drifts through a cracked window, a pale sliver of gold struggling to pierce the gloom of the manor hall. Dust swirls in the air, caught in the uneven shafts of sunlight, clinging to the remnants of a once grand life. Each particle trembles in the stillness, suspended between the present decay and the echoes of laughter that used to fill this space. The hall stretches into shadow, its corners choked with silence, as if the walls themselves are mourning. The floorboards are scarred and splintered, groaning beneath the weight of history, beneath the ghostly memory of footsteps that will never return. Children sit in the cold corners, their small forms huddled against the walls as though they could hold themselves together against the vast emptiness. Their bones jut sharply beneath thin, worn tunics, their skin mottled with bruises of cold and hunger. Lips cracked, hands trembling, they trace patterns in the dust, small rituals that make them visible in a world intent on forgetting them. They are fragile, yet something fierce simmers beneath their fear, a stubborn defiance born of necessity, of the knowledge that surrender here would mean vanishing entirely. A servant glides past, carrying scraps from a kitchen long emptied of abundance. The small offerings, a few crusts of bread, a bone gnawed clean of marrow, are lifelines. The scent of dried herbs lingers in the air, mingling with the stench of rot, a cruel testament to feasts that exist only in memory. Each step the servant takes is careful, measured, as if the floor itself might betray them. The children watch with hungry eyes, understanding that even the smallest portion could decide who survives another hour. One boy clutches a rusted key in his dirt-streaked palm. Its iron surface bites into his skin, but he holds it tightly, as though the key carries more than the promise of doors. It carries the fragile weight of hope, of futures imagined and never touched. He presses it against his chest and closes his eyes. In the silence, he hears the heartbeat of the manor, the slow drip of water from the leaky roof, each drop marking the relentless passage of time. The key is heavy, not in its metal, but in what it symbolizes. Opportunity denied, worlds locked away, memories of warmth and safety that have vanished like smoke through a chimney. Outside, the wind rises, whistling through broken windows and around the crumbling towers. It carries fragments of life from distant streets. The sharp cry of a merchant hawking his wares, the barking of dogs chasing invisible prey, the slap of wagon wheels against uneven cobblestones. These sounds are distant, muted by fog that spreads like a living thing, swallowing the world whole. Here, in this hall, life is measured in whispers, in shared scraps, in the quiet rhythm of survival. The children begin to move in small, careful motions, conserving strength. One girl shares a crust of bread with a boy smaller than herself, tearing it in two with trembling fingers, each half precious as gold. A whispered story drifts from child to child, a tale of knights and dragons, of kings who ruled wisely and cruelly alike. These stories are lifelines, threads connecting them to a world beyond the manor's decay. In them, they find courage, a spark of rebellion against the nothingness that threatens to consume them. Every small act of sharing, every whispered word, becomes a ritual of resistance. A candle flickers in a distant corner, its flame weak and wavering, casting shadows that twist across the hall like living creatures. The shadows stretch long and merge with the children, blurring the line between flesh and darkness. They become part of the ruin, specters of the manor's past, yet within their eyes burns an unyielding spark, a spark of curiosity, defiance, and hope. The boy with the key imagines doors opening, rooms filled with warmth, beds lined with clean sheets, voices that call his name without fear or anger. The vision is brief, almost cruel, but ignites a small fire in him, a determination to endure the cold, the hunger, the endless gray days that stretch ahead. The air is heavy with the smell of damp stone and wood, the subtle sharpness of herbs, the tang of decay. Every inhalation is a reminder of loss, yet also of life, fragile, stubborn, resilient. The children's whispers and movements form a rhythm against the silence, a pulse that marks their survival. One boy, shivering, presses his back against the cold wall and listens to the wind, learning its secrets. The sound becomes a guide, a companion, a signal that beyond the hall, the world continues, indifferent yet alive. The fog outside thickens as the morning drifts toward noon. Light wanes, shadows deepen, and the hall seems to shrink, pressing in on them. Yet they persist, finding warmth in proximity to one another, in shared glances and whispered encouragements. A small hand brushes against another, a gesture of solidarity, of shared endurance. Each child carries stories, not just of themselves, but of those who came before, of family and kin lost to famine, disease, or war. Their shared memory is a silent oath, to endure, to resist, to remember. The boy with the key presses it again, imagining not just doors but bridges, bridges to other children, to other homes, to other possibilities. The key becomes a symbol, a talisman against despair. Around him, the hall breathes with the small sounds of life, whispered words, the scuff of bare feet on wooden boards, the occasional cough or shiver. These sounds, though faint, create a tapestry of resilience, fragile yet undeniable. As dusk approaches, shadows stretch and merge, folding the children into the darkness that creeps along walls and floorboards. Outside, the fog swallows the distant market, the carts, the dogs, until the world beyond becomes a pale memory. Within the hall, however, life persists. Whispers continue, scraps are shared, and stories are told. The candle flickers once more, its flame trembling but unextinguished, mirroring the children's own fragile spark. Night falls fully, and the hall settles into a deep, almost holy silence. The wind moans through the broken windows, carrying the faint scent of earth and frost. The children huddle closer, their small bodies a fortress against the cold, their whispers a hymn to survival. The boy presses the key to his heart, a talisman of hope, while the girl offers one last crumb of bread to the smallest among them. Together, they form a fragile constellation of resilience, a light that refuses to be swallowed by darkness. In this hall of shadows and memories, where decay is constant and hunger is an ever-present companion, life persists not in grand gestures, but in the smallest, fiercest ways. A shared story, a crust of bread, a glance of understanding. Each is a rebellion against the void. And as the night deepens, as the fog thickens and the wind howls, the spark within the children endures, fragile yet unstoppable, a prelude to the larger story of human tenacity that awaits beyond these walls. Here, in the ruins of a forgotten manor, humanity clings stubbornly to existence. Though hunger bites, cold pierces, and time drags endlessly, the heartbeat of resilience persists, small and quiet, yet unmistakably alive. And in that heartbeat, a promise. The dawn may yet come, and with it, the chance to step beyond the shadows, to unlock doors long closed, to claim a future that hunger, decay, and despair cannot take. A harsh drizzle beats against the thatched roofs of a remote hamlet, each drop a tiny drum of despair. It falls without mercy, drumming on shingles that have long given up the pretense of protection, sliding down crooked beams to soak into walls scarred by years of wind, frost, and neglect. The rain is not gentle. It is insistent, carrying with it the scent of mud and decay, of earth turned against itself. In the narrow lanes, children stumble through ankle-deep sludge, their bare feet leaving prints that the rain swiftly washes away, as though the world itself conspires to erase them. The mud clings to their skin, cold and sticky, a second skin of survival that marks the passage of each agonizing day. In the distance, the ruined mill groans under the weight of waterlogged timbers. Its wheel, warped and splintered, turns fitfully in the swollen river, sending out a slow, hollow moan that echoes across the fields. The sound is not mechanical. It is mournful, a voice of the land itself, lamenting the absence of labor, of laughter, of life. Once, the wheel had turned for bread, for ale, for hope. Now it turns only in memory, a creaking requiem for what has been lost. The wooden planks of its walls bow under the water's insistence, the ropes of its mechanisms fraying like old sinew. Somewhere inside, rats scurry, unseen but present, as if claiming dominion over what remains. A mother kneels in the doorway of her hut, her back bent as though she carries the weight of the entire village. She wraps her arms around the smallest of her children, whispering a prayer that breaks in her throat, words jagged and trembling. Her voice merges with the rain, a thin and fragile thread of humanity trying to pierce the relentless gray. She murmurs of saints and of mercy, of harvests that might return, of winters endured before this one. The child in her arms stirs, eyes wide and damp with fear, yet pressed into the warmth of her chest, finding a fleeting comfort in the rhythm of her heartbeat. A father drags a splintered cart through the mire, wheels sucking against the mud with every step, leaving deep grooves in the earth. Inside the cart, what little remains of the family's harvest rattles. A cracked pot of milk, a few shriveled potatoes, a handful of grain kernels. Each item is a fragment of hope, a talisman against the certainty of hunger. The man moves with a quiet determination, scanning the edge of the woods that border the village. Beyond the trees, life still lingers, hidden and tentative, and he walks the line between desperation and survival, knowing that every misstep could cost his family more than he can bear. The forest awaits, dark and secretive, a place of both refuge and danger, where hunger and hope meet in uneasy silence. Smoke rises from chimneys, thin and pale, curling into the fog with a scent of soot, wet straw, and burning wood. The smell is a bitter comfort, a reminder that warmth persists, however fragile. Inside the huts, the faint clatter of spoons against wooden bowls marks the rhythm of the day's meager rituals. Children huddle together beneath frayed blankets, bodies pressed for warmth, eyes wide with the muted terror of knowing hunger too intimately. A boy crouches over a half-rotted apple, turning it in his fingers as if it were a treasure beyond measure. Its sweetness is fleeting, vanishing with each bite, yet for a moment it becomes a jewel, a shard of delight in a world stripped bare. Every gesture in the village carries weight. A nod, a tilt of a head, a hand offered across the mud to steady a stumble. Each act is laden with necessity, with unspoken understanding. The rain drums relentlessly, masking the low cries of the children, yet in their endurance there is a strange grace. They move silently, without complaint, learning the rites of patience and resilience, the lessons of a life governed not by choice but by circumstance. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and sweat, the chorus of sighs, whispers, and distant sobs forming a tapestry of quiet perseverance. The wind rises, pulling through the gaps in the walls, whispering through the eaves with a voice older than memory. It carries the scent of the forest, the decay of leaves, the promise and peril of life beyond the village. Each gust shakes the roofs, rattles the shutters, and brings with it a reminder that the world is alive, indifferent, and waiting. The father pauses at the edge of the woods, hand pressed to the rough bark of an ancient oak, feeling its pulse through the rain and the dark. The tree stands as a sentinel, a witness to generations, to the blood and sweat of those who came before, to the silent hope that life can endure even here, in mud and shadow. Night descends gradually, a cloak of gray mist and blackness. Lanterns are lit, flickering against the fog, casting long, wavering shadows across the narrow streets and the faces of the small ones who huddle beneath them. One child presses a palm to the warm glass, tracing the heat, finding comfort in its glow against the overwhelming chill. The ruined mill looms in the distance, a skeletal monument, as if the night itself has made a throne of its decay. The children move through the fog like ghosts, their forms merging with the darkness, small figures of endurance in a landscape that seems to have forgotten mercy. Inside the huts, whispers thread through the wooden walls. Eat what you can, a mother murmurs. Sleep before the dawn. Words laden with care and necessity, gentle but urgent. Children lie in corners, clutching scraps of food that are already cold, already insufficient. Yet each morsel is a victory, a momentary reprieve from the gnawing emptiness. They huddle together for warmth, for courage, for the shared heartbeat that reminds them they are not yet alone, not yet defeated. The wind howls through the gaps, carrying the scent of wet earth, dying leaves, and smoke. It is a voice that speaks of endurance, of courage forged in quiet desperation. Shadows twist across the village paths, alive in their own right, stretching and shrinking with the flicker of lanterns and the breath of night. The village moves as a living organism, each heart beating in careful synchrony with the others, each soul a thread in a tapestry woven from fear, hope, and unyielding determination. A lone figure emerges from the mist, a mother carrying a child on her back, the child's small head tucked beneath her chin. She pauses at the edge of the path, lifting the child to peer through the gray veil of night. Tomorrow, she whispers, the word trembling, half believed, half prayed. She rocks the child gently, a rhythm older than memory, each motion a defiance against hunger, cold, and despair. Around her, the village breathes as one, every hut a pulse, every lantern a flicker of life stubbornly clinging to existence. Even in darkness, there is a quiet anticipation. Beyond the trees, beyond the ruined mill, the next day waits. The children lie beneath wet blankets. The father returns from the forest empty-handed yet resolute, and the mother continues her prayers, threading the air with devotion and fear. Every life is a candle flickering against the wind, fragile yet unextinguished, a testament to persistence, courage, and a delicate balance between survival and surrender. With the first glimmers of dawn, pale light pierces the mist, silvering the wet fields. The village stirs, hesitant yet unbowed. Footsteps splash through the mud, carts creak along the narrow paths, whispers of encouragement pass from one to another. The drizzle softens, leaving behind the smell of rain-soaked earth and smoke, a memory of night endured and a promise of day to come. Children emerge from their shelters, small figures against the vast, awakening landscape, each holding on to fragments of food, warmth, and hope. The ruined mill, the muddy lanes, the scattered huts, they are no longer merely reminders of despair. They stand as monuments to resilience, witnesses to the quiet heroism of those who persist. Each glance, each whispered prayer, each careful act of kindness carries forward the story of a people who will not surrender entirely, who find grace in the smallest victories, and who cling to each other as tightly as the rain clings to the eaves. And as sunlight begins to lift through the fog, scattering pale gold across the fields, the children step forward, tentative but unbroken, towards a day that promises nothing and holds everything. The continuation of their stories, the whisper of memory, the slow, deliberate heartbeat of a world that refuses to yield entirely. The village waits, suspended in the quiet aftermath of night, ready to endure again, ready to live, ready to hope. Each life a fragile ember, each heart aflame in the relentless storm. The sun rises over the frost-bitten valley, but it is a timid light, pale and uncertain, struggling to pierce the frozen veil that clings to the earth. Snow-dusted fields stretch endlessly, brittle and white, the silence broken only by the occasional crackle of ice under unseen footsteps. In the ruins of an abandoned monastery, the children huddle together, small bodies pressed against the cold stone walls, breaths clouding in the frozen morning air. Their eyes are wide, hollow yet alive, scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. The world is both dangerous and wondrous, and they know it intimately. Every sound is amplified. The whisper of wind through broken arches, the soft thud of a branch against frost-covered stone, the distant cry of a crow perched on the belfry. The walls of the monastery, streaked with moss and soot, rise around them like tired guardians. Time has carved itself into the stone, etching centuries of prayers, footsteps, and whispered secrets into every surface. Here, in these ruins, the children are both intruders and inheritors. They move with careful reverence, understanding that these halls once held life in a way that now only memory can preserve. One boy kneels on a broken flagstone, fingers tracing cracks that have endured storms, sieges, and neglect. In his imagination, these fissures become rivers, mountains, battlegrounds. The monastery is no longer just shelter, it is stage, map, and playground all at once. A monk's robe flutters across the courtyard, lifted by the biting wind. Its fabric is faded, the gold embroidery dulled to ash, yet the scent of incense clings stubbornly, a ghost of devotion. The children inhale it without knowing why, a strange comfort in the chill. In the morning stillness, the robe seems almost alive, moving with memory and intent. It reminds them that these stones once echoed with ritual, discipline, and a purpose greater than survival. Now, purpose is fragile, held together by imagination and small acts of courage. One girl touches the robe lightly, fingertips grazing the worn fabric, and in that small gesture, she feels a connection to lives long past, a silent communion across time. The courtyard is littered with the remnants of sacred life. Carved stones lie broken, their angels and saints staring up at the sky with expressions frozen between serenity and sorrow. One girl sits cross-legged on a patch of frost, running her fingers over the delicate patterns etched into the cold stone. She imagines the hands that carved them, the prayers whispered into the walls, the hope sewn into every curve of wing and halo. Her fingers grow red in the cold, yet she does not stop, tracing the angels' faces as if to draw warmth from their eternal calm. In her mind, their silent guidance offers more nourishment than bread could, more solace than the fire they huddle around could ever provide. The wind carries more than cold. It brings voices from the past. It whistles through broken arches, rattling loose stones and stirring dust that has lain undisturbed for years. In its mournful sighs, the children hear echoes of footsteps, of whispers, of chants that once filled these halls. They listen, imagining monks moving with quiet purpose, novices reciting lessons by flickering candlelight, the soft murmur of prayer threading through the stone corridors. It is a presence that is at once comforting and melancholic, a reminder of structure, of civilization, a belief now vanished but lingering. In this auditory tapestry, every gust of wind is a thread connecting past and present, loss and resilience. Hunger is constant. Bread is rationed to scraps, water measured in cautious sips. Yet, even in want, the children discover abundance in imagination. A stick becomes a sword, a snowdrift a fortress, a beam of sunlight a window into another world. One boy lifts a broken bell clapper, swinging it like a hammer of justice, imagining armies obeying its command. Shadows stretch across the walls like spectators, bending and twisting as if caught in the children's stories. Every small act, sharing a scrap of bread, passing a patch of warmth, whispering a joke, is a rebellion against neglect, a testament to life persisting where it should have faltered. Their play is quiet but fierce. A girl collects fragments of colored glass, arranging them on the frost like a mosaic only she can see. Each shard becomes a jewel, a key, a secret message hidden from the harsh world outside. Another boy digs in the snow, Uncovering what he pretends is a treasure chest buried by monks fleeing some unseen peril. They trade stories of kings and saints, heroes and monsters, weaving myth into reality, letting imagination bridge the chasm left by absence and hunger. In their shared narrative, the monastery is transformed, reborn with every whispered plot, every improvised adventure. The ruins are no longer empty. They are theaters of resilience, stages of courage, and sanctuaries of the mind. The day stretches on, cold and relentless. Fingers stiffen, cheeks crack, noses redden, yet the children persist. They gather around a small fire, flames trembling as if conscious of their fragility. The warmth is fleeting, but enough to coax smiles, whispers, and daring laughter. They huddle close, shoulders touching, breathing life into each other in the way warmth can be passed between bodies. In these moments, survival is more than mere sustenance. It is the quiet insistence of life over despair, the slow cultivation of hope where it had been thought impossible. The monastery itself seems to lean in, as if listening, holding these small victories within its ancient, unyielding embrace. Evening descends like a soft shroud. Shadows lengthen, stretching across walls and courtyards, painting the ruins with ghostly patterns. The wind moves through the arches with a mournful, almost sentient rhythm, carrying whispers of the valley below. The children, now weary, bundle together, breaths visible in the frigid air. Eyes half closed, they listen to the stones, the wind, the echo of a world that has not been kind. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls. Though broken, the sound resonates, carrying sorrow, memory, and hope in equal measure. The monastery cradles them, a hollow sanctuary filled with the pulse of life against all odds. Night deepens, and the stars pierce the darkness with cold, unyielding light. Frost decorates every surface, etching delicate filigree across windowless walls and frozen earth. The children dream, their minds painting visions of a restored monastery, gardens lush and green, fires burning with endless warmth. They move through corridors repaired by memory, playfields crafted from imagination, a kingdom of resilience and wonder. In sleep, hunger softens, the wind becomes a lullaby, and the shadows bend into guardians rather than threats. Each dream is a thread, weaving a tapestry of defiance against the emptiness that surrounds them. The monastery, in these hours, becomes more than stone. It becomes memory made flesh, endurance carved into every surface. Each hallway, each arch, each broken window tells a story of survival, of defiance, of hope fragile yet unyielding. The children's presence animates it, and their whispered narratives give voice to the walls that have seen centuries of devotion and decay alike. Here, resilience is physical, mental, and spiritual, a complex interplay of imagination and instinct, courage and vulnerability. The night air is sharp, carrying the faint aroma of smoke from a distant hearth, mingled with the subtle scent of frost and stone. The children huddle closer, sharing what little warmth they can, their breaths mingling in ephemeral clouds that rise and dissolve into the darkness. In the softest moments, the monastery seems to pulse with them, alive not with monks or prayer, but with the quiet insistence of small, beating hearts. Every act of imagination, every story whispered into the cold air, is a statement of survival, an affirmation that even in neglect and ruin, life persists. As the hours pass, the wind sighs through the broken arches like a chorus of memories, carrying both the sorrow of abandonment and the stubborn hope of those who endure. Outside, the valley sleeps beneath its icy blanket, unknowing, uncaring. Yet within the monastery, life flickers fragile and bright, carried by children who have learned to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. Each scrape of a finger across carved stone, each small sharing of warmth or food, becomes ritual, a testament to humanity enduring in the face of absence. Here, every breath, every heartbeat, every whispered story becomes sacred. And as the long night stretches onward, a single truth crystallizes. These children, small and hungry, are more than victims. They are chroniclers of a world that has forgotten them, witnesses to a history written in frost, shadow, and stone. The monastery holds them, not as shelter alone, but as witness, cradle, and guardian. Every wall, every arch, every carved angel becomes part of their narrative, enduring beyond the span of mortal hunger and fear. The valley outside may be cruel and indifferent, but here, within these ruins, life persists, imagination blossoms, and hope, however fragile, refuses to die. The wind moves once more, carrying the unseen, unfed souls of the valley across the icy expanse. And the monastery, empty yet full, silent yet alive, holds the children close. Here begins a long, poetic narrative, one of endurance, memory, and quiet rebellion, stretching across centuries of cold, darkness, and history, waiting to unfold further in the lives that will follow. A candle guttered in the wooden hut, its flame trembling as if it could sense the weight of the night pressing in from every shadowed corner. The small room, no larger than a closet by some measures, seemed to hold the entire world within its four walls. Shadows danced across the children's faces, bending and stretching in strange shapes that whispered stories of hunger, of absence, of lives interrupted before they could truly begin. They were too young to comprehend the depth of cruelty that lay beyond the fragile barrier of wood and smoke, yet their bodies remembered it with a clarity far beyond their years. Every bone, every hollow in their small frames, carried a memory of what. The hut smelled of smoke, of damp earth, of the sweat and toil of the day, of bread long gone stale, and water collected from the river outside. Every surface bore the imprint of survival. Bowls nicked and cracked from years of use, frayed rope coiled against the wall like a serpent waiting, a knife dulled from years of labor and necessity. These objects were not mere tools. They were companions, silent witnesses to the persistence of life in a world that seemed determined to erase it. Outside, the river sang its ceaseless song. Water churned over stones in endless repetition, murmuring secrets it had learned from forests, from storms, from centuries of passage. It was both lullaby and warning, a sound that comforted and frightened in equal measure. The river's voice swallowed the faint cries of the unseen, the whisper of leaves, the distant echo of a cart on a road no longer traveled. And yet, within this relentless chorus, the hut became an island, a tiny bastion of fragile life, where two children clung to existence with the stubbornness of weeds pushing through stone. The boy, no more than 10, held a piece of bread stolen from a granary in the village. His small fingers were sticky with crumbs, each one a treasure, each one a fleeting victory. He chewed slowly, reverently, as if he could stretch the sustenance into eternity, as though savoring it could somehow defy the reality that had brought them here. Hunger had become a teacher, cruel and exacting, instructing in patience, in stealth, in the quiet audacity of hope. Beside him, his sister hummed a low tune, a melody their mother had once sung to fill the long hours with warmth and comfort. The memory of her presence lingered like smoke, ungraspable yet undeniable, tangible in absence. Every sound inside the hut was amplified by the silence that surrounded it. The creak of the door, the scrape of wood beneath shifting weight, the sigh of wind threading through cracks in the walls, all of it became monumental. In their world, nothing was small, nothing insignificant. Each noise carried meaning. The stirrings of life, the thread of discovery, the rhythm of endurance. Within these walls, ordinary sounds became markers of existence, proof that life, no matter how tenuous, persisted. The boy's eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the candlelight in fragments, casting his gaze into multiple directions at once. There was a solemnity in those eyes that belied his years, a quiet understanding that the world was a place of unending need and fleeting mercy. Hunger etched itself not only in his body, but in his gaze, shaping a patience born of necessity, an awareness that survival demanded a constant negotiation with danger. Beside him, his sister's song wavered, bending under the weight of their shared absence. Yet within its rhythm was the first pulse of hope. Outside, the wind swept across the riverbank and through the skeletal trees, carrying the smell of mud, rain, and distant forests that lived oblivious to the suffering of these small figures. The children pressed themselves to the walls, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath their feet. In that contact with the living world, they found a quiet assurance. The river would not stop flowing, the wind would not cease its path, but neither would they disappear without a fight. The candle's flame trembled, casting monstrous shapes in corners that seemed to breathe, stretching in time with the children's silent breaths. The boy whispered a prayer, a string of uncertain words swallowed by the dim air of the hut. "Let it last," he said, unsure whether he meant the bread, the candle, or the fragile thread of life that tethered them to the world. His sister's songs softened in response, bending around the sound of his voice like a shawl of comfort. In that moment, even the smallest sound became sacred, a link between memory and survival, between what was lost and what remained. The knife on the table glinted in the flickering light, a silent sentinel. Its edge, dulled by years of use, had carved bread, split wood, and defended the body against threats both real and imagined. Tools in this life were memory incarnate. Each nick, each chip, each mark was a testament to the endurance required to persist in a world that had forgotten them. Yet the greatest act of survival was not in the steel or wood itself, but in the children's refusal to vanish quietly, their insistence on being, even when the night pressed close with the weight of indifference. The night deepened. Shadows thickened. The river's song became a distant murmur, a heartbeat in the world beyond. The candle's flame, small and fragile, became a living presence. It flickered, but did not falter, much like the children themselves. In that trembling light, the space between hunger and hope became visible, delicate yet undeniable. The children's resilience took shape in the quiet, invisible yet powerful, a presence that filled the room with meaning beyond the reach of absence or despair. The boy closed his eyes, tasting the memory of warmth as he swallowed the last crumb of stolen bread. The song of his sister enveloped him, a thread of sound that bound the moment together, that stitched the cracks in time with melody and breath. Each movement, each glance, each shared understanding was a small act of defiance, a refusal to let despair claim the night entirely. Outside, the river whispered secrets of a world uncaring, of forests and plains where life persisted regardless of human suffering. Yet inside, a different rhythm held sway, a rhythm of endurance, of subtle courage, of moments stretched into eternity by attention and care. The hut was more than wood and smoke. It had become a sanctuary, a temple of survival where the smallest acts, a stolen piece of bread, a song hummed in the dark, a flickering flame, took on the weight of miracles. The wind moaned around the hut, and the shadows pressed closer, merging, folding, twisting into grotesque shapes. But the children remained, small figures against the tide of night, witnesses to a world that had turned away yet could not erase them. The candle continued its dance, every flicker a heartbeat, a pulse of existence that defied absence, cold, and hunger. In its light, The boy's small prayer lingered, unanswered yet heard, a signal to the universe that life, fragile and fleeting, would not surrender quietly. The night pressed on, long and patient, yet within its expanse, a fragile constellation of endurance shone. Every breath, every shared glance, every whispered song was a spark in the darkness. The hut, modest and battered, contained a story written not in ink, but in survival, in the quiet, persistent defiance of two children who refused to be broken. Hunger, cold, and absence remained, but their presence mattered enough to shape shadows, shape sounds, shape the rhythm of existence in that small corner of the world. And so, as the candle flickered, shadows curling into corners, and the river's song faded to a distant memory, life persisted. Hunger persisted. Absence persisted. But so did hope. The children slept lightly, eyes half closed, still alert to sound, to danger, to the rhythm of a world indifferent yet still strangely accommodating to those who refused to vanish. The flame lingered, trembling, unwavering, carrying the promise of stories yet to unfold, of nights survived, of the human spirit's quiet insistence upon life. In that fragile light, the hut was more than shelter. It was a crucible, a sanctuary, a testament to resilience. Every small act, bread eaten in reverence, song hummed against despair, the steady pulse of a candle's flame, was a marker of endurance. And somewhere between fear and courage, absence and memory, hunger and hope, the children dreamed of what might come, unaware yet deeply intuitive of the tender balance between despair and endurance that would shape the nights ahead. The candle guttered once more, and in its trembling glow, the hut breathed, lived, and witnessed. Shadows stretched, merged, and receded. Outside, the river continued its endless journey, uncaring, eternal, yet within the fragile walls, life whispered, and hope flickered, waiting for the dawn that would come, as it always does, even if unnoticed, even if unheralded. The frost clung stubbornly to the remnants of the market, turning shattered carts, splintered barrels, and jagged shards of wood into brittle sculptures of ice. Each crystallized tendril reflected the weak winter light, sparkling faintly like the last remnants of hope. The air was sharp, a knife of cold that burned through threadbare shawls and gnawed at exposed skin, carrying with it the acrid tang of smoke from charred hearths long abandoned. In the hush of this frozen courtyard, silence pressed heavier than stone itself. Every sound, every scrape of a boot, every whispered breath, echoed like a secret too fragile to survive the day. Children crouched behind toppled carts and splintered crates, pressing themselves to the cold, rough ground. Their small bodies curled into themselves, as if shrinking might render them invisible, might make the world forget them. Their eyes were wide and luminous, reflecting both fear and fleeting wonder, holding the light of innocence that still refused to die. Fingers blackened from scavenging traced invisible paths across the cracked cobblestones, scraping away at frost and filth alike, as if searching for traces of warmth left behind by someone who had come before. The smallest movements became monumental in this silence. A footstep, a sigh, the rustle of cloth, each magnified, amplified by the stillness that hung over the courtyard like a shroud. One girl, perhaps 7 years old, lifted a ragged shawl to shield herself from the wind. Its fabric was thin, threadbare, and frayed along the edges, patched with scraps that bore faint, indistinct colors that had long since faded into dull monotony. Yet within the frail folds of that garment, she found armor, a small declaration of existence against the vast emptiness. Her hands trembled, not only from cold but from the acute awareness of vulnerability, the knowledge that a single misstep, a single sound, could bring attention from those who would take what little she and her companions possessed. Every gesture, every hesitant movement, carried the weight of survival, of defiance, of dignity carved from hunger and frost. A bell tolled somewhere far beyond the walls, its voice carrying across the empty streets, mournful and indifferent. Each resonant note pressed against the courtyard like a finger tracing the contours of absence. Absence of warmth, of food, of voices once familiar. The children listened, hearts thrumming, ears straining, each toll marking the passage of time in a world that seemed to have stopped noticing them. The sound was a heartbeat in a landscape otherwise emptied of life, a reminder that the world moved on, even as they froze in the grip of winter and despair. The wind shifted, rattling broken fences and whipping against the walls, tugging at tattered banners and fraying ropes. Somewhere, a wooden spoon fell, clattering against cobblestones with the startling sharpness of a gunshot. Even this small noise seemed significant, a punctuation mark in the quiet litany of survival. Every small act of humanity became monumental. A crust of bread offered from one hand to another, half frozen and fragile, carried the weight of sacrament. A whispered word, soft enough to be mistaken for the wind, became a lifeline. A hand brushed a child's cheek, leaving warmth like a fleeting promise in a world otherwise bereft of kindness. Each glance exchanged held the gravity of sacred trust, for in this courtyard, trust was the currency of survival. Hunger, cold, and fear were constant companions, yet they did not snuff out the flickering pulse of compassion threading its way through the children's lives. In this place, survival had become ritual, a daily devotion, a silent testament to endurance. The children moved cautiously, merging with the shadows, bodies pressed close to the frost-bitten earth. They whispered to one another in half-formed words, breaths puffing white in the icy air, voices barely more than wind against wind. One boy, no more than 8, tore a small piece from a frozen loaf and pressed it into the hand of a smaller sibling. Their lips brushed the crust, and the act, so mundane in another life, here became a declaration. We persist. We exist. In a courtyard emptied of laughter, these small gestures were monumental, each carrying the weight of defiance against the vast indifference surrounding them. As darkness deepened, the frost spread over every surface, turning the courtyard into a brittle, shimmering tomb of memory. Shadows lengthened and swallowed the children's forms, leaving only the faint shimmer of breath in the frigid air. The cold earth became a canvas for invisible stories, tales of hunger, of fear, of fleeting moments of joy that burned briefly before vanishing. The wind moved through broken walls and fences like a ghost, carrying the scent of smoke, rot, and decay, a whispering witness to lives pressed into survival. And yet, amid this harsh landscape, there was dignity. Even in the frost-bitten silence, life clung, stubborn and fierce, refusing to surrender. A sudden creak, a whisper of movement, a shutter rattling in the distance, a door barely held closed, shattered the monotony of the night. The children froze, bodies taut, breaths held, hearts hammering. Fear and curiosity danced together, warring in equal measure. Yet the ritual of survival demanded courage. Slowly, cautiously, they moved again, stepping into the spaces between shadow and shadow. Each movement was deliberate, a silent poem of endurance. The tilt of a head, the careful placement of a foot, the brushing of fingers along frost-split wood. Each gesture carried meaning, each pause a sentence in a story written not with ink, but with persistence. The courtyard itself was a living memory. Burnt stubs of market stalls jutted skyward like broken teeth, skeletal reminders of abundance lost. A tilted cart groaned as the wind shifted, its plaintive sound like the sigh of an old man burdened by decades of neglect. The frost whispered, crackling as it clung and fractured, murmuring secrets only the children could hear. They listened, attuned to the language of absence, understanding that every sound could be warning, lesson, or gift. Their senses sharpened in the absence of comfort, tuning to a world stripped bare. One girl paused beneath a skeletal tree, gnarled limbs reaching toward the pale moonlight like pleading hands. She inhaled the icy air, letting it burn her lungs, let it steel her resolve. Around her, the other children huddled, eyes reflecting faint glimmers of light like fireflies trapped in frost. In that hush of night, they became witnesses to one another's courage, to one another's defiance. There was no laughter here, no chatter, only the quiet, deliberate symphony of persistence. They were shadows, yet profoundly present, a congregation of the forsaken, their hearts drumming a silent ode to survival. And in the farthest corner, under a tree stripped bare by winter's cruelty, one small figure knelt, hands clasped in prayer, lips moving silently, eyes closed against the bite of wind. It was a gesture that spoke of longing, of hope, a belief in something larger than hunger and frost. The world beyond had grown indifferent, even cruel, but here, in this frozen courtyard, there remained a spark, not of wealth, not of power, not of safety, but of stubborn life. Fragile, yes, but unbroken. The bell tolled again, deeper now, reverberating through the empty streets, marking not the hours, but the heartbeat of the unseen. As night grew heavier, the children folded into the shadows, melting into the darkness, but their courage lingered in the frost, in the broken carts, in the whispering wind. The courtyard, though barren and bitter, had witnessed their existence, their silent rebellion against erasure. It was a place where even in absence, a story could be written, a story fragile, trembling, yet fiercely alive, a story that would carry forward into the uncertain dawn. And when the first pale hints of morning stretched across the horizon, brushing frost-bitten rooftops and skeletal fences with faint gold, the courtyard waited. It waited for the children to emerge again, for the small rituals of survival to resume. The cold earth, hardened and unyielding, held the traces of their existence like sacred inscriptions. Footprints pressed in a frost, small hands tracing lines in the cracked stones, eyes wide and gleaming with life's defiance. Here, in this desolate courtyard, in the frost and decay, life persisted. Every breath, every movement, every whispered act of kindness was a defiance against oblivion, a prayer written not in words, but in persistence, endurance, and fragile, indomitable hope.